Chapters 3 to 7 of Peace of Mind by Lucius Annaeus Seneca. Translated by Aubrey Stewart. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Chenevert. Of Peace of Mind by Lucius Annaeus Seneca. Translated by Aubrey Stewart. Chapter 3. You ask me what I think we had better make use of to help us to support this ennui. The best thing, as Athenodorus says, is to occupy oneself with business, with the management of affairs of state, and the duties of a citizen. For as some pass the day in exercising themselves in the sun and in taking care of their bodily health, and athletes find it most useful to spend the greater part of their time in feeding up the muscles and strength to whose cultivation they have devoted their lives, so too for you who are training your mind to take part in the struggles of political life, it is far more honorable to be thus at work than to be idle. He whose object is to be of service to his countrymen and to all mortals, exercises himself and does good at the same time when he is engrossed in business and is working to the best of his ability both in the interests of the public and of private men. But, continues he, because innocence is hardly safe among such furious ambitions and so many men who turn one aside from the right path, and it is always sure to meet with more hindrance than help, we ought to withdraw ourselves from the forum and from public life, and a great mind, even in a private station, can find room wherein to expand freely. Confinement in dens restrains the springs of lions and wild creatures, but this does not apply to human beings, who often effect the most important works in retirement. Let a man, however, withdraw himself only in such fashion that wherever he spends his leisure, his wish may still be to benefit individual men and mankind alike, both with his intellect, his voice, and his advice. The man that does good service to the state is not only he who brings forward candidates for public office, defends accused persons, and gives his vote on questions of peace and war, but he who encourages young men in well-doing, who supplies the present dearth of good teachers by instilling into their minds the principles of virtue, who seizes and holds back those who are rushing wildly in pursuit of riches and luxury, and, if he does nothing else, at least checks their course. Such a man does service to the public, though in a private station. Which does the most good? He who decides between foreigners and citizens, a praetor peregrinus, or, as praetor urbanus, pronounces sentence to the suitors in his court at his assistant's dictation, or he who shows them what is meant by justice, filial feeling, endurance, courage, contempt of death, and knowledge of the gods, and how much a man is helped by a good conscience? If, then, you transfer to philosophy the time which you take away from the public service, you will not be a deserter or have refused to perform your proper task. A soldier is not merely one who stands in the ranks and defends the right or the left wing of the army, but he also who guards the gates, a service which, though less dangerous, is no sinecure, who keeps watch and takes charge of the arsenal. Though all these are bloodless duties, yet they count as military service. As soon as you have devoted yourself to philosophy, you will have overcome all disgust at life. You will not wish for darkness because you are weary of the light, nor will you be a trouble to yourself and useless to others. You will acquire many friends, and all the best men will be attracted towards you. For virtue, in however obscure a position, cannot be hidden, but gives signs of its presence. Anyone who is worthy will trace it out by its footsteps. But if we give up all society, turn our backs upon the whole human race, and live communing with ourselves alone, this solitude, without any interesting occupation, will lead to a want of something to do. We shall begin to build up and to pull down, to dam out the sea, to cause waters to flow through natural obstacles, and generally to make a bad disposal of the time which nature has given us to spend. Some of us use it grudgingly, others wastefully. Some of us spend it so that we can show a profit and loss account, others so that they have no assets remaining, than which nothing can be more shameful. Often a man who is very old in years has nothing beyond his age by which he can prove that he has lived a long time. Chapter 4. To me, my dearest Serenus, Athenodorus seems to have yielded too completely to the times, to have fled too soon. I will not deny that sometimes one must retire, but one ought to retire slowly, at a foot's pace, without losing one's ensigns or one's honor as a soldier. Those who make terms with arms in their hands are more respected by their enemies and more safe in their lands. This is what I think ought to be done by virtue, and by one who practices virtue. If fortune get the upper hand, and deprive him of the power of action, let him not straightway turn his back to the enemy, throw away his arms, and run away seeking for a hiding place, as if there were any place whither fortune could not pursue him. But let him be more sparing in his acceptance of public office, and after due deliberation discover some means by which he can be of use to the state. He is not able to serve in the army? Then let him become a candidate for civic honors. Must he live in a private station? Then let him be an advocate. Is he condemned to keep silence? Then let him help his countrymen with silent counsel. Is it dangerous for him even to enter the forum? Then let him prove himself a good comrade, a faithful friend, a sober guest in people's houses, at public shows, and at wine parties. Suppose that he has lost the status of a citizen, then let him exercise that of a man. Our reason for magnanimously refusing to confine ourselves within the walls of one city, for having gone forth to enjoy intercourse with all lands, and for professing ourselves to be citizens of the world, is that we may thus obtain a wider theatre on which to display our virtue. Is the bench of judges closed to you? Are you forbidden to address the people from the hustings, or to be a candidate at elections? Then turn your eyes away from Rome, and see what a wide extent of territory, what a number of nations present themselves before you. Thus it is never possible for so many outlets to be closed against your ambition that more will not remain open to it. But see whether the whole prohibition does not arise from your own fault. You do not choose to direct the affairs of the state, except as consul, or prytanis, or medix, or suffes. What should we say if you refuse to serve in the army, save as general or military tribune? Even though others may form the first line, and your lot may have placed you among the veterans of the third, do your duty there with your voice, encouragement, example, and spirit. Even though a man's hands be cut off, he may find means to help his side in a battle, if he stands his ground and cheers on his comrades. Do something of that sort yourself. If fortune removes you from the front rank, stand your ground nevertheless, and cheer on your comrades. And if somebody stops your mouth, stand nevertheless, and help your side in silence. The services of a good citizen are never thrown away. He does good by being heard and seen, by his expression, his gestures, his silent determination, and his very walk. As some remedies benefit us by their smell as well as by their taste and touch, so virtue, even when concealed and at a distance, sheds usefulness around. Whether she moves at her ease and enjoys her just rights, or can only appear abroad on sufferance and is forced to shorten sail to the tempest, whether it be unemployed, silent, and pent up in a narrow lodging, or openly displayed in whatever guise she may appear, she always does good. What? Do you think that the example of one who can rest nobly has no value? It is by far the best plan, therefore, to mingle leisure with business. Whenever chance impediments or the state of public affairs forbid one's leading an active life, for one is never so cut off from all pursuits as to find no room left for honorable action. Chapter 5. Could you anywhere find a miserable city than that of Athens when it was being torn to pieces by the 30 tyrants? They slew 1,300 citizens, all the best men, and did not leave off because they had done so, but their cruelty became stimulated by exercise. In the city which possessed that most reverend tribunal, the court of the Areopagus, which possessed a senate, and a popular assembly which was like a senate, there met daily a wretched crew of butcherers, and the unhappy senate house was crowded with tyrants. A state in which there were so many tyrants that they would have been enough to form a bodyguard for one might surely have rested from the struggle. It seemed impossible for men's minds even to conceive hopes of recovering their liberty, nor could they see any room for a remedy for such a mass of evil. For whence could the unhappy state obtain all the Harmodiuses it would need to slay so many tyrants? Yet Socrates was in the midst of the city, and consoled its mourning fathers, encouraged those who despaired of the republic by his reproaches, brought rich men, who feared that their wealth might be their ruin, to a tardy repentance of their avarice, and moved about as a great example to those who wished to imitate him, because he walked a free man in the midst of 30 masters. However, Athens herself put him to death in prison, and freedom herself could not endure the freedom of one who had treated a whole band of tyrants with scorn. You may know, therefore, that even in an oppressed state a wise man can find an opportunity for bringing himself to the front, and that in a prosperous and flourishing one wanting insolence, jealousy, and 1,000 other cowardly vices bear sway. We ought, therefore, to expand or contract ourselves according as the state presents itself to us, or as fortune offers us opportunities. But in any case we ought to move, and not to become frozen still by fear. Nay, he is the best man who, though peril menaces him on every side, and arms and chains beset his path, nevertheless neither impairs nor conceals his virtue. For to keep oneself safe does not mean to bury oneself. I think that Curius Dentatus spoke truly when he said that he would rather be dead than alive. The worst evil of all is to leave the ranks of the living before one dies. Yet it is your duty, if you happen to live in an age when it is not easy to serve the state, to devote more time to leisure and to literature. Thus, just as though you were making a perilous voyage, you may from time to time put into harbor, and set yourself free from public business without waiting for it to do so. Chapter 6. We ought, however, first to examine our own selves; next, the business we propose to transact; next, those for whose sake or in whose company we transact it. It is above all things necessary to form a true estimate of oneself, because as a rule we think that we can do more than we are able. One man is led too far through confidence in his eloquence; another demands more from his estate than it can produce; another burdens a weakly body with some toilsome duty. Some men are too shamefaced for the conduct of public affairs, which requires an unblushing front. Some men's obstinate pride renders them unfit for courts. Some cannot control their anger, and break into unguarded language on the slightest provocation. Some cannot rein in their wit, or resist making risky jokes. For all these men leisure is better than employment. A bold, haughty, and impatient nature ought to avoid anything that may lead it to use a freedom of speech which will bring it to ruin. Next, we must form an estimate of the matter which we mean to deal with, and compare our strength with the deed we are about to attempt. For the bearer ought always to be more powerful than his load. Indeed, loads which are too heavy for their bearer must of necessity crush him. Some affairs also are not so important in themselves as they are prolific, and lead to much more business, which employments, as they involve us in new and various forms of work, ought to be refused. Neither should you engage in anything from which you are not free to retreat. Apply yourself to something which you can finish, or at any rate can hope to finish. You had better not meddle with those operations which grow in importance while they are being transacted, and which will not stop where you intended them to stop. Chapter 7. In all cases one should be careful in one's choice of men, and see whether they are worthy of our bestowing a part of our life upon them, or whether we shall waste our own time and theirs also. For some even consider us to be in their debt because of our services to them. Athenodorus said that he would not so much as dine with a man who would not be grateful to him for doing so. meaning, I imagine, that much less would he go to dinner with those who recompense the services of their friends by their table, and regard courses of dishes as donatives, as if they overrate themselves to do honor to others. Take away from these men their witnesses and spectators, they will take no pleasure in solitary gluttony. You must decide whether your disposition is better suited for vigorous action or for tranquil speculation and contemplation, and you must adopt whichever the bend of your genius inclines you for. Isocrates laid hands upon Ephorus and led him away from the forum, thinking that he would be more usefully employed in compiling chronicles. But no good is done by forcing one's mind to engage in uncongenial work. It is vain to struggle against nature. Yet nothing delights the mind so much as faithful and pleasant friendship. What a blessing it is when there is one whose breast is ready to receive all your secrets with safety, whose knowledge of your actions you fear less than your own conscience, whose conversation removes your anxieties, whose advice assists your plans, whose cheerfulness dispels your gloom, whose very sight delights you. We should choose for our friends men who are, as far as possible, free from strong desires, for vices are contagious, and pass from a man to his neighbor, and injure those who touch them. As therefore in times of pestilence we have to be careful not to sit near people who are infected and in whom the disease is raging, because by so doing we shall run into danger and catch the plague from their very breath. So too, in choosing our friends' dispositions, we must take care to select those who are as far as may be unspotted by the world. For the way to breed disease is to mix what is sound with what is rotten. Yet I do not advise you to follow after or draw to yourself no one except the wise man, for where will you find him whom for so many centuries we have sought in vain? In the place of the best possible man, take him who is least bad. You would hardly find any time that would have enabled you to make a happier choice than if you could have sought for a good man from among the Platos and Xenophons, and the rest of the produce of the brood of Socrates, or if you had been permitted to choose one from the age of Cato, an age which bore many men worthy to be born in Cato's time, just as it also bore many men worse than were ever known before, planners of the blackest crimes. For it needed both classes in order to make Cato understood. It wanted both good men that he might win their approbation, and bad men against whom he could prove his strength. But at the present day, when there is such a dearth of good men, you must be less squeamish in your choice. Above all, however, avoid dismal men who grumble at whatever happens, and find something to complain of in everything. Though he may continue loyal and friendly towards you, still one's peace of mind is destroyed by a comrade whose mind is soured, and who meets every incident with a groan. End of chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.